it, and asks for Ur and his men to come forward one by one, as he was about to hold a knighting ceremony for them to officially be the warrior of their tribe. And with that, Ur the Bone Warrior had been born, and this is the god's will. So Rakrakarak told him that he should stand proud, which he was, seeing that he can't even contain his tears from coming out. A few moments later, the dawn had arrived, and since they were all set and ready, Rakrak announced for them to depart this holy place, and he assured them not to worry, since their God's will is with them. That's why they are not bound to a place anymore. And so everyone should carve the nameless beetle god into their heads. And remember that even though their path will be full of challenges, they have to move forward without fear, just as they endured the desire to eat the water buffalo. If they endure and move forward, they will prosper, and it will benefit everyone. And they shouldn't worry because their God will always be with them. And with Rakrak's speech, everyone's heart was moved, and so they were more eager to leave this place with hope of a promised land ahead. Meanwhile, Rakrak just took a deep breath, as he asked his God to forgive him for using his name to convince his people to leave this place. But Nebula believes that there was no need for him to apologize, as he understood very well his intentions, and if Rakrak didn't do that, he wouldn't have chosen him as a priest in the first place. Rather, he was more than glad of what Rakrak had done, as he even achieved the growth of another entity, leveling your attributes significantly. And also even Rakrakarak's special abilities finally saw light, as it further improved in one night. And with how Rakrak have done well so far and have not disappointed his expectations, Nebula was convinced that from now on, Rakrak will be a full-fledged start for his godhood. A few days later, the group was still traversing the wilderness, but because of the heat, Manun collapsed on the spot, so Rakrakarak immediately went to check up on it, but it seemed like Manun just exhausted itself. So he asked Stargazer if it was possible for them to take a rest, which Stargazer approved, since it can't be helped. At this, he signaled to everyone to take a short break, which the warriors pass on the message to others. But as they rest, Rakrak overheard countless of concerns from his tribesmen. One such doubting if they could even go to the promised place he so proclaimed, they even doubt if taking a rest would gain back their strength, as they were all exhausted, and they even barely ate anything, making things much worse. But Rakrak understood all of this, since they have been in the wilderness for 3 days. Now, once of it, the whole group is very tired, and they are running out of food. With such circumstance, they can only hope for another miracle to happen. But it seems like he doesn't have to wait for long, as one of his warriors hurriedly approached him to notify him that a flock had appeared ahead of them, and they are scaleless bastards. The scaleless bastards they were talking about is a group of steamy orcs, and is now excitedly rushing towards the lizard man that they saw as they planned to take their resources, and get out of this horrible place as quickly as possible. And they were confident in defeating those lizards, as they believed that their species is more powerful in terms of strength. But to their surprise, these lizards aren't your average day-to-day lizards, and they even have the whole crew with them. With this, they instantly knew they messed up, and so they just froze in fear, and observing their reaction, Rakrak couldn't help but teasingly mock their foolishness, likening them to moths blindly drawn to a flame, unaware of the danger they were courting. However, they were too stunned to even respond, and looking at their units, it seemed like these lizards are more well-equipped than they were. With this, the orc leader immediately lowered his weapon and bowed his head, and asked Rakrak for forgiveness, and explained that they did not mean to make such a big fuss. They were just in a hurry as they wanted to get out of the canyon as quickly as possible. This confused Rakrak, because as he had observed the hillside, there didn't seem to be a problem, and according to Stargazer, the canyon they were in now would take 3 days for them to traverse, but as they had endured everything until now, they would surely be able to endure another 3 days. In addition, as the environment changed, edible things began to appear here and there, so he couldn't understand why they want to leave that hill as quickly as possible. In turn, he asked the orcs to explain further, which the orc lord didn't hesitate to do. Just that, explaining to them that they wouldn't even think of leaving their home, but they were left with no choice, and so they ran away, and it was because a monster had appeared. This surprised Rakrak's group, and if the group of orcs were guilty of something, they would have to make up for it, but Rakrak thought that was unnecessary, and following the rules of the wilderness, Jael recommended taking away what the orcs had, but Rakrak didn't do so. Instead, just as Jael gave Rakrak food, and Rakrak gave Manun food, he gave some food to the orcs as well, which the orc leader hadn't expected to be welcomed, and so he bowed down so far that his head touched the ground, while Rakrak left the orc to do as he pleased, but he emphasized that it wasn't given for nothing, so he asked the orc to tell him more about the monster, which he gladly will, and tell him in exact details. The group of orcs had lived close by, they weren't able to go deeper into the mountains, as there were stronger species, and especially carnivores there, however, compared to the wilderness. It was easy to find food in this area, so it wasn't much of a problem for a group of 30 orcs, but one day, the monster appeared. The monster apparently had a hard upper body, and seemed to crawl on the ground like an insect with many legs, and it was over 20 meters long. Meanwhile, Nebula recognized exactly what it was once he heard the description. It's no doubt an abomination. The plot of the game, The Lost World, was that old gods had left the planet, however. The gods were the only ones who had disappeared, and the numerous species and creatures that served the gods remained. Among them was the abomination. Simply put, it was like a giant boss monster that appeared on the field, and whoever took the risk and hunted it would get a corresponding award. The problem is that it's tricky to deal with for a low-level civilization, and the reason why he was sure of it was simple. The abomination was a creation of the gods, therefore, divinity modifiers existed for its skills. This meant that its skills are going to be incredible. It won't be that high, because it's out in the field, as opposed to inside a dungeon, but considering its basic skills and special abilities, it will be stronger than Rakrak with +3, and if they had an equal fight, Rakrak would likely be injured, and even if he didn't, the rest of the warriors would suffer injuries. With this, Nebula was considering if he should give them a hint to take a detour, however. It wasn't quite a good idea to do that either. Because Rakrak's clan and the herd of buffaloes were all losing energy, but to Nebula's surprise, Rarik proved himself again why he was chosen by him, as if Rakrak had a similar thought to him. Rakrak called out Stargazer, and asked him if there is a way they can go around, to which Stargazer responded that there are, but they would have to go back to the wilderness and walk around the mountain for 8 days. Instantly, Rakrak shook his head as if he didn't like what he heard, so it seems like they can't run away without even seeing what their opponent is like. But as they had feared, it was undoubtedly strong. It was about 15 meters long, which was smaller than what the orc had described, but it was in no way small. The body was elongated and covered by a hard outer shell. It even had a pair of venomous fangs. Singing from the top of the outer skin was a half-destroyed stone structure which signified that the ancient people had served this creature. The moss that covered the structure gave away how old the creature was. And its divinity level was at 3, and since its basic strength was 120, it would still be stronger than Rakrak, even if divine control was used. And even though Rakrak's group couldn't see the creature's stats, they seemed intimidated by the ancient Coleoptera as it twisted its body under the valley, and it didn't help that its mere movements shake the ground, and it even revealed to them by the Orc Lord that turbulence was caused by the creature just moving in its sleep. With this, Yor asked Rakrak if they should run away. However, Rakrak knows all too well that it would be costly. With this, Rakrak was not sure on what to do next, but as they were waiting for Rakrak to decide, Joel was inspecting her surroundings, and noticed the huge boulder just sitting on the edge of the hill, and so she immediately approached Rakrak and told him that they must fight because they have the advantage. This led Nebula to take interest in Jael's opinion, and so he briefly took a look at her stats, revealing to him that she has the Arbiter class. This meant that one is trusted by the clan, which he already knew, but her intelligence level is higher than Rakrak's, and it keeps on rising. But the most interesting thing is her special ability, Intuition. It was a special ability that hadn't popped up until recently. It was perhaps newly created due to recent experiences. With this, Nebula waited for Jael's next words. To his surprise, Jael talked about what the Iron Craftsman did to heat the iron, until Now they have been blowing air with their mouths, waving their hands, or ripping large pieces of bark and fanning them. However, the iron craftsman seems to use a different method. A special tool called bellows, it was able to blow much more wind and was more convenient. And with just this, Rakrak get what JL's trying to convey, and that by using tools. Less power can be used to project more power. But the problem was, they do not have a tool like bellows. Also that tool was made by the craftsman, after he thought about it for a long time. In response, JL clarified that they won't need such a sophisticated tool. A simple tool will be more than enough. As the monster they need to deal with is sleeping at the bottom of that hillside, and they are at a much higher elevation. They are no different than a craftsman sitting in front of a forge, so if they just prepare and act accordingly, they will be able to heat the metal. These words alone didn't make sense to Rakrak or the rest of the warriors. But JL proceeded to tell them a specific idea she had in mind. Rakrak and the warriors nodded and took it well. That was also true for Nebula, so he used a miracle to summon a blue butterfly in front of Rakrak, which the warriors wondered what was happening as a blue butterfly appeared out of season in the wilderness. While Rakrak stared blankly at the butterfly's wings, and his eyes began to shine, and then raised the corners of his mouth, as this was a sign that God has given permission. With this, he decided to go what JL had just said. And so, they immediately went to the steep and rugged hillside. At the bottom of the hillside, where the ancient Calyptra was twisting and sleeping, there was a steep slope of about 70-degree angle. This meant that were Rakrak and his warriors to fight the ancient Calyptra there, they wouldn't be able to easily move around due to the steep slope, and would likely come into direct contact with the ancient Calyptra. On the other hand, the giant ancient Calyptra had many legs, so it would be able to climb an even steeper slope. Still, it won't matter, because Rakrak will be the only one to get close to it, because, according to the plan, the only time Rakrak was going to approach the ancient Calyptra was when they were going to kill it. And with just a few moments of preparation, the warriors were now stationed beside the boulders that Rakrak had pointed to. They weren't bare-handed, they found and uprooted a few tall trees in the area, and were each holding one in its entirety. To roll the boulders and crushing it to death, it was indeed a simple plan, but a plan that required imagination. Even Rakrak thought confronting and fighting it face to face was the only way. But Jal, on the other hand, thought differently. JL didn't know exactly how to express it, but she was using her knowledge to prove with real actions that moving large things with little strength was possible. And in Nebula's eyes, her knowledge could be referred to as physics to systematize it, as she's basically applying the principles of mass and kinetic energy alongside positional energy and leverage. But that didn't mean JL would suddenly become a physicist. However, just as the iron craftsman's skills influenced JL's intuition, one event could influence many individuals, which is a good thing for Nebula. So he eagerly looked at their every move, and since everything was ready, the warriors immediately went into action. However, the boulders didn't move right away, and so JL signaled to a beat, which was effective as the boulders gradually started to shake more and more. And it was not long until a boulder rolled over the ridge. But to catch a crustacean of that level, it would be better if all the rocks hit it at the same time. However, it wasn't the case, as they only managed to toss one, and that wasn't enough. It just enraged the creature, and therefore it immediately crawled up the hill to attack them. And even with its large body, this mofo was fast, and with this, Nebula knew that it was too late, and so he took over Rakrax's body with divine control. Instantly, Rakrak successfully pushed the second boulder that was about to roll over the ridge with great force. Then he proceeded to push the third boulder hard, which wasn't moving easily due to it being the largest one out of the three. Still, with Nebula inside of him, he had managed to push it to the edge. But still, Rakrax knew that the creature would not just run towards the boulder head on, so he clasped his spear and jumped from the mountain ridge, flying 300 meters across the air, and threw the spear with all his might. With this, the spear shot through the air like a ray of light, and penetrated through the ancient Calypra's shell. And even though it was a small wound, it was enough to restrain its movement for a moment. With this, the ancient Calypra received the boulder like it was on a promo, a buy one, Take one at that, and because the boulder directly landed on the ancient Calipra's head, it died in an instant. After seeing the death of the giant monster, the group roared for Rakrax, the warriors, and for the great beetle god. Meanwhile, Nebula was delighted of the outcome, but it wasn't the increased faith points that mattered. His divinity level hadn't changed as leveling up had gotten slower, and there wasn't much XP. What really mattered was the item he gained from it, the essence of abomination. When it came to being a god, their greatest power was the ability to create something. Just as Nebula was able to create enough maggots to feed the lizard man due to his small area. The insects. Each god was able to create resources according to their areas by using faith points. However, to create something that doesn't exist in the world, resources that were equally uncommon had to be used, and that would be the essence of abomination, and with this essence, it would be possible to create a creature. These creatures are faith resources generators that spread the word of God through their very existence. Also, growth is possible, and if one raises it to a higher level, it would obtain the title apostles or incarnations, and could be employed as useful strategic weapons in place of God's will, and if the creation method itself is the same as the previous game, then he would easily be able to make a creature, which in turn made him wonder what to make. However, he decided to not make one right away as it costs a lot to maintain in the beginning, and it is better to create a creature at another time even if all the necessary resources had been collected. For now, it was a priority to use faith points to help Rakrax and the group, but at least Nebula had learned that the Creature Maker program that was in the game The Lost World was also available to him now. So he left the program window open within his view. Meanwhile, Jael approached the defeated monster, curious if they could use the meat of this monster as food. She cut off the tip of the ancient Coleoptera's foot, however, the aroma of it wasn't pleasant, still it wasn't particularly a sign not to eat it, so she puts it into her mouth before promptly spitting it out, but she admits that the taste isn't that bad. And it's edible as well. However, it is still difficult to eat it raw. This led her to wonder if it was possible to add other ingredients, just like an edible fragrant grass, and cook it over a fire. And with a few moments later, she had cooked up a meal made from the legs of the monster, in which Rakrax consumed with caution, but as the meat touched his taste buds, he was surprised that it was edible, although a bit bland. The aroma of it was quite nice, and seeing his reaction, Jael proudly called it cooking. She topped the meat with edible scented herbs and cooked it over fire, which Rakrax appreciated. That she thought of a solution this quick, because he had been considering to throw the monster's carcass all away since the smell was so strong, but with her cooking, it seems like their list of edible food broadened, and so he prompted asking if she could also teach him how to cook, which she responded that she could. However, before that, she wants to address a concern that occupied her mind for a while, and that she saw the orc leader earlier also had a successor, and because Rakrax is a leader as well, he too needs to find a companion soon. This sudden suggestion of hers immediately froze him up, and the meat that he was eating got stuck in his throat, but he was able to swallow it due to the uniquely wide throats lizard men were born with. Still, he was thrown off by Jael's words as he had never cared much about finding a companion. For the past few years, he was preoccupied with his concerns about God, the tribe, and surviving in general, but before he could even think of a response, Jael pointed out that he is getting old, so it is necessary for stability of the tribe, and seeing that she was serious about this, he man up and composed himself, and asked Jael if what she meant was a partner, to which she confirmed, and if he had never really think about it, then how about he consider her, but because of how sudden this all was, he wasn't sure how he should reply. Fortunately enough, something else happened that he needed to attend to. There lay the altar broken by the boulder, and inside of it, something was shining, reflecting light from the sunset. Among the fragments of the altar was a tablet made of gold. This was a surprise to Nebula, but the golden tablet that Rakrax found was a very common relic. If one was lucky enough to chance upon an ancient ruin, they could find a library of calligraphic works that was full of written language from that era. The ancient people wrote about every little thing, so it would be considered great luck if the writings they found weren't simply about building houses or other trivial matters. However, this is a decent find. Rockrak and the group didn't know what it said on the golden tablet, as they didn't know what the characters meant, but to the player, all information was revealed. The inscription on the golden tablet is an introduction to the ancient civilization that was once called the Kalimbar Empire. It largely consists of writings about the greatness of the Kalimbar Empire and its achievements. So there isn't much important information to be gleaned. Nevertheless, aside from its value as a source of information about an ancient civilization, it gives a hint about other ancient remains of the Kalimbar Empire. But civilization needs to be a lot more advanced to translate it. And because the Lost World was full of ancient civilizations, it wouldn't be necessary to reach the level of development of modern civilization on Earth, where a framework to interpret Egyptian hieroglyphics could be established based on the famous Rosetta Stone. Nevertheless, a diverse society with archaeologists, linguists, universities, and sufficient knowledge of a variety of civilizations was needed. So right now, the tablet is no different from trash. But because the golden tablet itself was a piece of very shiny metal, it attracted the attention of the lizard men. Yor even picked it up and tried to eat it, but to his dismay, Stargazer revealed to him that he couldn't do that, since it is a metal called gold, and it is said that the color does not change or rot even after a long time. That is why they are a little more valuable. However, gold was a soft metal and would serve them no better than iron right now. It would be worth having the precious metal as decoration, but that type of art was unfamiliar to the lizard man compared to other species. With that explained, Yor was still hungry. So Stargazer suggested to catch a deer. Its meat is sweet and delicious, and they have heard that the orcs had found deer track earlier, so they should go now before the night comes. And so the others decided to leave and throw the tablet and just set it aside. However, Rock did not intend to throw it away. It seemed that Rock actually liked the golden tablet, and so he told the others to go without him, while he thinks about what to do with this tablet. And he was so engrossed with it because everything dies lots and disappear. There is nothing in the world that does not change. But this golden tablet does not rot. So Rockrak's got a feeling that those who made this tablet tried to preserve something on it, but he doesn't have a single clue where to start. And so he just stared at it for a little while. A few moments later, Jael reappeared to tell him that everyone is ready for bed. But Rockrak saw this as an opportune moment to seek Jael's opinion. And so he told her about what he thinks of this tablet. And seeing that she fully understood where he was getting at, Rockrak pointed out that he also noticed there are rules to the engravings, as there were shapes that are the same. This in turn made Jael point out that it is similar to the hunting marks their warriors make. And just like how he is the only lizard man wearing a fur coat, which he specifically told him to wear. And that is because she wanted him to have a distinctive item that set him apart. A symbol as the tribal leader. With this, his understanding broadens. But still it was too early for him to realize what these symbols meant. And so few hours had passed, and he was still in front of the sacrificed deer and is still looking intently at the tablet. Meanwhile, Nebula saw a slight possibility. With his support, Rock might be able to invent primitive letters. Especially when Rax was high. So he was likely to continue paying attention to something that he was interested in. And so he gave it a try. But a god giving direct knowledge to their tribe would consume a great amount of faith points. But giving hints was no different from a normal miracle. And with this, Rock saw something strange. It seemed that the bugs were moving according to certain patterns. As if there was an invisible hand guiding them. These hallucinations appeared and disappeared several times before Rockrak's eyes. He thought the wriggling motions seemed familiar. And his realization wasn't far off. He was thinking that the movement of these bugs is similar to the engravings that the ancient people made on the golden tablet. With this, Rock thought of a few things and drew on the ground with a stick. But first, he copied the characters on the golden tablet. Then, he doodled things that weren't letters or symbols. And soon after, he erased the lines that he had left on the ground with his hands, lost in his thoughts. Now he was considering that it might not be the gold that won't rot with this golden tablet, but might be something else. And with this, he had spent the night writing on the ground with the stick. And when morning arrived, Rock-Rax went to Jael's tent and woke her up. Which she initially thought that there might be something wrong. And Rock-Rax clarified that he has something to show her, and Rock-Rax seemed somewhat excited. So she decided to follow him. And as they went over to a clear ground, Rock-Rax started writing. He first drew a triangle and 2 perpendicular lines with a stick. And explained to Jael that this was him, a male lizard. This intrigued Jael, so she asked to explain further. So then, Rax drew an inverted triangle in 2 lines, and explained that this was her, to be precise, a female lizard. And seeing that Jael understood what he meant, Rock-Rax then proceeded to draw 2 lines between the 2 drawings. Rock-Rax fell silent after drawing these 2 lines, so Jael had no choice but to ask first. In response, with a more sincere tone, Rock-Rax explained that this symbol meant becoming each other's companion. And this is also his answer to what she asked. With this, they looked at each other's eyes intently, but Jael felt that something is missing in those symbols that Rock-Rax wrote. So she took the stick from Rock-Rax and drew a circle. And Jael asked Rock-Rax if he get what this means, and with certainty, he answered that he does. And with that, the 2 lizards fell in silence under the soft light of the early sun, as they were in the moment of clarity, comfort, and a feeling of being exactly where they were meant to be. A system notification popped up, notifying Nebula that Raik-Rak had indeed invented writing. And so Nebula cheered in joy on the inside, as there was no one to even watch him if he expressed it. However, it'll still take lots of generations to develop more. Nevertheless, it was still the beginning stage of the game. Now, Nebula just have to enjoy the show, because as Rock-Rax and Jael decided to be each other's companion, the clans celebrated this matter with a festival on the surface. It might seem like a simple hunt, but capturing the largest prey to present to their spouse is how lizard men celebrate their wedding ceremonies. And Rock-Rax once again proved his eligibility as a companion by offering the largest deer to his bride. But to their surprise, Jael had managed to catch a deer as well, but she made it look so easy compared to how Rock-Rak did it. Even Nebula couldn't hold a faint laugh to come out. It seems like Raik-Rak would have had an interesting married life. After the wedding, Rock-Rak gave the land back to the orcs, which the orcs couldn't believe what he just heard. And so he asked Rock-Rak if he was sure, confidently. Rock-Rak answered that he was, as the monster was an obstacle they had to defeat after all. And he also mentioned this was their land to begin with, so they can just live here again. Just like they used to. With this, the Orcs Lord couldn't help his tear to come out. He didn't expect someone to be this kind, and so with all his heart, he bowed to Raik-Rak and expressed how thankful he was. Now they owe him and his clan a great favor, and he would like to repay it. And since they are planning to go deeper on the mountains, he offered that his son lead the way for them, as they have lived here for a long time, so they know a path through the mountains that is wider and isn't as rugged, to which Rock-Rak gladly nodded at the generous gesture. But before they could leave, the Orcs Lord thanked Raik-Rak once more, because before this, they used to live while being pestered by bigger beasts and larger tribes, but because of him, they might just be able to overcome it, and they will never forget this favor. This made Raik-Rak smile, and so he nodded in understanding. And just like that, Rock-Rak and his clan went on their way in a hurry. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, Nebula knew this game wasn't that easy. The reason why there were so many random encounters and negative events in the Lost World is probably because it is based on a real world, and he can already foresee what the next event will be, and just like what Nebula had expected, just within the next few days, Rock-Rak learned of another tribe not too far away that was also constantly scouting for danger around them. Raik-Rak didn't recognize the footprints, but the Starcatcher did. It's a frog footprint. Rock-Rak knew much when it came to the frogs. They were slippery, swam well, jumped up and down, and some even had poison. And he knew all this, because they are able to eat the ones with poison now after God gave them his blessing. And many frogs lived in the ponds, and when the end of winter came, they would run out of food and had to come out of hibernation. The lizard men would catch and eat them. The footprints looked similar to the ones left by those frogs the lizard men had eaten. but were very different in size. And so, Stargazer clarified that it came from the frogman, a species that walks on 2 legs. They can also speak and think like them. This surprised Rak Rak, as frogmen were a rare sight given their natural habitats were few and far between, such as rivers and lakes. Even for lizard men with their wide range of activities, frogmen were hard to come by. And so Rak Rak eagerly searched through the bushes and counted the footprints. To his surprise, there isn't just one, but quite a bit of them. With this number, it seemed like they are a larger tribe than them. And this footprint indicate that they must be scouting as well. It's prompt Rak Rak to ask Stargazer if these frogmen are belligerent, to which he responded that they might be, as they made their home here first. But that's not always the case. They're the same as any other bipedal species. Some are good, and some are bad. With this, Rak Rak decided to return to their temporary base to discuss this with others. After the meeting was done, Rak Rak told everyone to set up their camps as wide as many as possible. This idea that came from jail had a purpose to deceive the frogmen into thinking their clan is large when seen from the outside. And there are lots of trees, so it's easy to make a fire. And they will have a bunch of guards keep an eye on the fires at night. And if they make more fires here and there, the frogmen will think their group is twice the actual size, despite the fires not being of use. It will also be good to keep watch at night, keeping in mind that the warriors will go on a reconnaissance. This was a sound idea. However, Rak Rak pointed out that the work should be equally distributed amongst the lizard men staying guard so that no one complains, which she understood. And with that, a few moments had passed by, and their plans had come into reality. And now they felt more confident to take rest even though the other tribe will be watching them. And true to their expectations, just beyond the mountains, several frog silhouettes could be seen. And a few days had passed, they switched bases. Fortunately, they did not encounter any frogmen. And during that time, they had prepared a lot of things to ensure the tribe's safety. At this point, Nebula even doubt there are many players who are more successful than him, as cattle breeding went smoothly. And their housing lifestyles were quickly evolving to adapt to the changed environment. The most fascinating thing was how quickly they established the concept of writing. And that is all thanks to Rak Rak, who was actively using the written language he had recently discovered. When the warriors came back from reconnaissance, he would always listen to what they saw at the big wide rock in the middle of the village. And he will always mark the shape of the river onto the large rock. On the rock, the village was marked at the center, and distances were marked based on a particular scale to show the topography of the area. To be exact, it was a map that was developed from hunting marks, but the idea of making a permanent record like written language was applied. This record was actually useful, helping the warriors that were split into groups to figure out the surrounding terrains while Rak Rak was away. And this served as an opportunity for the clan to become interested in the utility of writing and records, which were made possible because their now more stable lifestyles allowed them more spare time. Rather than having them overwork themselves, Rak Rak recommended keeping written record as they went about their various activities. As an example, he told them they could each write down how many pieces of fruit they had collected every day so that it was possible to know exactly who worked less and who worked more. And once the lizard men started recording things, the ones who were more diligent reduced the amount they collected by a reasonable margin, rather than criticizing their fellow lizard men, while those who fell short collected more. This proved to be effective in improving everyone's productivity. It was just as Rak Rak had expected, however, he gained more insights than he had expected. He realized that when they relied on their memories, they would live by compromising. It caused emotional stress since some were more diligent, while others got lazy, and no one was able to say anything because there was no clear evidence. Now though, everyone is being careful as they know records are permanent. And although Rak Rak's idea hadn't been recognized by the game system, Nebula noticed what Rak Rak's idea stemmed from. A simple discovery was meaningless. Once the culture of writing and recording began, they could do a greater variety of things than before, and realizing the importance of this idea was the first step. With this, Nebula was delighted as they're doing better than he thought they would. And Nebula hadn't been able to pay much attention to Rak Rak's clan recently. Even though Rak-Rak's clan was Nebula's only tribe, he had many other things to do. Just like in the game of the Lost World, as gods had many more responsibilities outside of managing their tribes. Nebula currently had 3 large swarms of insects. These swarms weren't simply controlled by Nebula. Each group had grown into their own entity. One of these swarms was the swarm of locusts in the west that indirectly benefited Rak and his clan. These locusts focused on disrupting and eliminating factors that could pose a threat or create unnecessary variables to Rak-Rak's clan. And the second swarm of insects, which Rak and his clan weren't even aware of, were in the far south of the forest. In the game, there was a trick called Small Area XP farming, and the south of the forest was dedicated for this. At this place, Nebula was creating and cultivating all kinds of insects to transform the area into a nest full of insects. Because of this, Nebula was able to level up his small area from 3 to 4, which in turn gave him a new skill. But this is a method he wouldn't have dreamt of doing if there were other players nearby. Because they definitely wouldn't just watch and do nothing at the sight of this kind of farming. But because Nebula's starting location was on the outer part of the peninsula, it seemed that other players hadn't discovered it yet. And he definitely has to take advantage of the fact that he started in an area with only a few other players. But if other players were around, there would be many technical benefits from a clash of civilizations, just like when Rak-Rak's clan and the Blue Skin tribe met. So rather than Nebula being ahead of the other players, it could be said that he was trying to make up for potential losses, at least for now. And the fact that Rak-Rak's capability and the status of the tribe are currently above average. So he was more confident to get ahead of others. But this is just the beginning, because what will happen next will be even more dangerous than anything ever experienced. So then, Nebula observed the first encounter between the two tribes. As one of Rak-Rak's warrior went up to him and notified him that the frogmen were coming towards them. In response, Rak reminded the warrior of the importance of providing detailed information in such reports. Specifically, the number of enemies, their armament, and the speed of their approach. The warrior quickly apologized for the oversight and then provided the necessary details. There were 7 in the group. All of them were armed and they are slowly making their way towards them. And there is one more thing that even Rak was briefly surprised by what the warrior said. But he decided not to think too deeply about it before he saw and judged things for himself. And being armed but approaching on foot means there's a chance for conversation. When numbers are also small, with this, Rak decided to lead 10 armed warriors to meet the frogmen before they reached the village. He took 10 because they needed more numbers for safety. But they also shouldn't look intimidating just to have a conversation. And as the two tribes met at a small clearing in the forest, the warriors had been observing and delivering information about the frogmen until now. So their first sight of the frogmen wasn't completely unfamiliar. Their skin was slippery and they were somewhat smaller than lizard men. They were characterized by their large eyes and transparent eyelids and their short necks. And bodies that looked hard and firm seemed common for frogmen. And Rak confirmed that the special note relayed by the warrior was true. There were 6 frogmen and next to them was a lizard man with grayish-brown scales, which made him think the possibility that this was an effort to make peace. And seeing the tension between the group, the leader of the frogmen broke the ice by introducing himself first. He called himself Shunan, son of the great tribe leader Alyui. And they have no intention of fighting them. Seeing that these frogmen were courteous in their own way, Rak also introduced himself. And he also emphasized that they have no intention of raising their weapons. And as the two leaders spoke to each other, both tribes that were standing guard returned to a resting position. Still, Rak couldn't help but think it would have been better if the tribal leader had come himself. But Rak didn't expect that much. So he gets straight to the point and asks them the reason they were here, to which Shunan explained that they have come to let them know that his tribe has invaded their territory. It was just as Rak had expected. There was no need to accept Shunan's words as an attack. After all, only by stating that their opponent was in the wrong could one press for an advantage. Still Rak knew how to deflect this, so he stated that he wouldn't say the whole land is their territory, as there was no sign suggesting that this land had an owner. already. And therefore they didn't know, but he apologized for not noticing they were here first. And Shunan didn't say anything for a moment after Rak Rak made a clear apology, as he recognized that Rak Rak had gotten one over on him. And seeing their reactions, Rak Rak continued to clarify things up. He stated that their circumstance is a bit different, as they have come from a place very far away. He is not sure if they will settle down long term, but they need to stay here for now as they have no other place to go. This made Shunan stutter as he doesn't know how to respond. But Rak Rak did, and so he used his glib tongue to state that is his first time seeing Frogman, but Shunan, son of the great tribal leader Aloy, seemed like a warrior capable of making decisions, and is the only one who has the authority to show them mercy and grant their request. And Shunan couldn't come up with anything contrarian, so he ended up agreeing with Rak Rak. He was even proud to boast that this is possible with his authority as the next leader of the tribe. And as Shunan was dancing on the top of Rak Rak's palm, he noticed the big warrior standing beside Shunan glancing at him. It was a look of dissatisfaction. With this, he figured out that the tribal chief probably assigned that warrior to his son because he doesn't trust him, while keeping a closer watch on them, but he still has a lot of questions in mind, and therefore he decided to be extra careful in collecting information. With this in mind, Rak Rak suggested that instead of talking here, Shunan should come to their village to be welcomed since both tribes have come to an agreement without much conflict. And when Shunan was about to go along with what Rak Rak had suggested, the big warrior whispered something into Shunan's ear. Shunan's attitude suddenly changed, so instead of going with Rak Rak's idea, he just stated that they don't have a lot to thank each other for, and he doesn't think they have that much mutual trust built yet. Still, Rak Rak couldn't let them leave just yet, so he stated that them lizard men can't just send Shunan off after being indebted to him for what he has done for them, so he suggests to have a meal at this spot instead, and before Shunan could respond, he turned to the big warrior, and the warrior nodded. With this, Rak Rak and Shunan is now sitting across each other while they are waiting for the deer to be cooked, but now that Rak Rak was able to let them stay a little longer, his mind was preoccupied on how to find out more about the relationship between that single lizard with these frogmen and what their intentions were in coming together, but he can't let them know that he is curious. Because if they realize he want to know more, they'll use it to their advantage. With this in mind, Rak started a casual conversation with Shunan. He stated that he may accept that the land around here is the frogman territory, but he wants to know on what grounds they are saying this. This prompted Shunan to point out the decorative feathers hanging around his neck, and stated with pride that these are the feathers of the cockatrice that lives in a forest nearby. But as expected, Rak doesn't have a clue on what that is, so Shunan explained that they are dangerous animals who live around this forest. Huge birds that walk on their 2 feet, they are not just large in size but poisonous as well, and it is very difficult for them to catch, and they never manage to kill it in their many encounters, but only barely chasing it away, because aside from their speed, they also have a wide range of movement. They are the reason why they keep watch around the area. And because of Shunan's descriptions, Rak was curious on how they managed to deal with the cockatrice, so he asked Shunan if they use a javelin as a weapon, but this just made Shunan smirk, knowing the fact that they are far above these lizard men as the only long-ranged weapon they could think of as a javelin, and Rak also noticed Shunan's subtle smugness. Still, it didn't bother him as he was more curious on what these frogmen could offer. And so he let Shunan be the smug lord that he was. And as expected, Shunan excitedly wanted to show off their weapon, the bow and arrow. And Rak took interest in the weapon he hadn't heard of, and the lizard men hadn't seen a bow before since they grew up in places where there weren't many species of trees, and thus were short on wood supplies, and so he looked at Shunan intently. Surprisingly, Shunan called out the lizard with them who was named Owen, asking him a favor if Owen could bring him his bow and arrow, which Owen gladly responded that he will. And seeing that Shunan was considerate of the lizard, it left a positive impression on Rak, and after Owen handed the bow to him, Shunan asks Owen once again to set up an appropriately sized wooden board on the tree nearby, so that he could practice his archery, which Owen gladly did, but with just this, Rak's impression of them immediately changed, as he noticed a strange power relation between Shunan and the lizardmen. Owen. Shunan acts like he's asking a favor, but it seems to him that Owen is an errand boy. However, anyone compared to the son of the tribal chief would seem like an errand boy. So he didn't say anything, and just observed Owen do his work and watched Shunan's archery practice. The arrow Shunan shot flew with a whoosh and struck the middle of the target. This impressed Rak, and as Rak admired Shunan's skills, he was also picturing in his head how to respond if they were to fight the frogmen, but as he was thinking this, Shunan then boasted about how they learn archery from when they were young, and he is one of the best archers in their tribe, which Rak responded kind, but he was more curious on how to handle the bow, so he asked Shunan if he could also use this weapon called bow, to which Shunan gladly handed the bow to him, but he emphasized to Rak that it will be hard since it's his first time after all. But Rak didn't hear a single thing that Shunan had said, as he was more enticed with the weapon that he was holding, and as he inspected the weapon, he noticed the branch and string are definitely sturdy. Its power is weak compared to a javelin, but he can carry few arrows around. It's also a lot more precise than a javelin, and has a faster attack speed. It's a weapon they absolutely need, and therefore he would like to look into this roughly to his heart's content, but as Shunan stated, his skills with the bow were trash. Strength wasn't an issue, it was a skill issue, because a beginner is still a beginner even if they are strong, so Rak couldn't hit shit, just like how a storm trooper start their daily training, and he missed his shot like the plank of wood had a plot armor. Still, Shunan was kind enough to say inspiring words and avoid saying anything rude, but as Rak was still inspecting the bow, Shunan asks Owen, what is he doing, not collecting the arrows, and so Owen ran immediately to collect it, while Shunan was somewhat irritated of the fact that he still has to remind Owen of this, but this was a great opportunity for Rak, and so he explained to Shunan that he shot those arrows, and therefore he should have been the one to go pick them, which Shunan was caught off guard by this, since Rak was a leader after all, but this might be just the way of the lizard men, so he let Rak do what he pleases, and as Rak picked up an arrow from the ground, Shunan shrugged and shifted his gaze to where the meal was being prepared. With this, Rak picked up another arrow and approached Owen, but Owen panicked like he didn't know how he should behave in front of Rak, which he thinks that it was a strange reaction. But still, Rak went through with his plan and tried to interrogate Owen, asking, why is a lizard man like him with the frogmen, which Owen stuttered a while before finzing his voice to explain it was because lizardmen and frogmen are living together. Rak was thrown off as he never imagined such a thing would be possible. If different species lived together, their differing lifestyles would inevitably lead to conflicts. Rak didn't think of frogmen this way, but some other species would be disgusted by the physiological aspect of frogmen. Even if a friendly relationship was maintained, it was normal for communities to divide. And so Rak asked Owen to explain further. To which Owen did, and it was because both species are of help to each other. This was a surprise to Rak, and so out of pure curiosity, he asked Owen to be specific about it, and Owen replied as if he had rehearsed what to say, stating that, in exchange for receiving protection from frogmen, them lizards can help out by doing tasks that are inconvenient for the frogmen, as frogmen can't live outside of water for too long. Lizardmen are also better than frogmen at climbing trees or picking fruits, and lizardmen in return can eat the fish in the water. What Owen had said sounded like they were helping each other, but something was strange to Rak. And there was no doubt sharing food is good, but Rak pointed out to Owen that lizardmen doesn't need protection, because lizardmen have the ability to defend themselves. This made Owen shook his head, but he seemed surprised, as he panically tried to convince Rak that this forest is dangerous, and Aloy's frogmen are a big tribe. It will be hard for them lizardmen to survive without the frogmen, and Rak wanted to ask more, but he was starting to feel the weight of Shunan's gaze, and he doesn't like what he heard, so he told Owen to forget the conversation they just had, and just pretend that he only asked about how to be good at archery. Afterwards, the two groups ate while having small talk, but as soon as Shunan got to eat the meat, he was gladly surprised of the flavor that was in it, just by adding fragrant herbs it made the meat even more delicious, and seeing that Shunan knows how to enjoy a large, juicy meat. Rak Rak asked Shunan if he had ever tried a water buffalo, which made Shunan more excited than before, as he had eaten one, but it's been a while since he had caught one, but even still he could remember how delicious it tastes, and since Shunan was visibly interested in the buffaloes they had, he asked if Shunan is willing. They could trade for a pouch of arrows, to which Shunan was about to agree. However, he instantly changed his mind as soon as he noticed the facial expression of one of his guards glaring at him intently, so it seems like there was no chance they would trade even a single bow, but Rak Rak just reacted stoically as to not garner some suspicions from Shunan's guards. Still, Shunan just broke the tension again, clarifying that they will delve into those discussions when their friendly relations deepen, and likely it would not be too far off. As they could see, the members of their own tribe do not bear hostility with lizard men, they're being friendly to not just Owen who came here with them, but the rest of the lizard warriors, and that's all because the two races live together in their village. To further prove this, Shunan called out Owen and asks him to explain to Rak Rak how they have spent the past few months helping each other out, which Owen was glad to be of service, as long as it will promote friendship between them. But Rak Rak just looked at Owen with suspicious eyes, because as expected, they brought it up so easily as if they had prepared for this beforehand, and if Rak Rak hadn't interrogated Owen first, he would have believed every word that came out of Shunan's mouth, and like Owen, Shunan also seemed to have a speech prepared, which raised Rak Rak's suspicion even more. And after that facade was over, Rak Rak offered for the two tribes to meet again. Such events were mainly for tribes to exchange or share food to make them closer. Shunan gladly accepted the offer, prompting Rak Rak to suggest to meet them somewhere a bit closer to their tribe next time, instead of having them come from afar, which Shunan was about to accept. But just like before, standing next to Shunan was a boy the guard. And once again he interrupted before he could accept Rak Rak's offer. So Shunan immediately changed his decision, and now he stated that this place is fine. And there is nothing that blocks their vision, and it's a good place for both tribes to keep an eye on each other, which Rak Rak just accepted it to avoid further tension between the two tribes. And with that, the two tribes decided when to meet and went their separate ways, and Rak Rak saw Owen glancing back at him a few times through the group of frogmen returning home. This was enough of a confirmation that there is definitely something going on. Even Jarl saw through their lies, as they were too obvious. The way they act doesn't look like the relationship of people on an equal footing. A few hours later, along the lake where Aloy's frogmen settled down and made home, Owen, the lizard man, collapsed on a small sandy beach, as he was slapped hard by Shunan, accusing Owen of revealing confidential information to the lizardman's tribe leader, because of how worried they were. And knowing that saying the truth wouldn't do him good, Owen bowed his head and clarified to them that the tribe leader of the lizard man only asked him how to be a good archer, and he only answered that question. But the warrior, oh boy, found it ridiculous as Owen couldn't even shoot an arrow properly, so he then kicked Owen on the side while Shunan just watched. Then Owen tumbled on the ground with a grunt. But even with this, Owen still explained to them that he only told him that he could use a bow, so that it wouldn't make the lizardman's tribe leader less suspicious of them, which was a sound reasoning for Shunan. And seeing their demeanor change, Owen explained further that the lizardman's tribe leader then kept asking how a bow is made, as he didn't think the frogman would tell him. But he said that he couldn't tell him because he was in great debt to the frogman, and if he really wanted to learn archery, he told him that he should pay a fee first. But he said regretfully that he couldn't give him anything right away and gave up asking. With this, Shunan was impressed of how shrewd Owen is, and so Shunan looked at Oboy, signaling that he thinks that would be enough, which Oboy also thinks as well. And as if nothing happened, Shunan praised Owen, as expected from the sharp trickster they knew of, and as Owen felt relieved that the interrogation was done, Shunan reminded Owen that his role in this was big, which he understood quite well. And seeing Shunan was talking with his head turned towards the lake, Owen followed his gaze. There was a small island in the middle of the lake, on which were a few huts obscured by bushes. The frogmen warriors took turns surveilling the area closely. young lizard men were trapped inside of the huts, and among them was Owen's child. And as Owen was thinking of this, Shunan smirked wide and clear and told Owen how lucky he really was. He was about to offer those children as sacrifice, but the new sacrifices have found their way here instead, so he is very lucky indeed, to which Owen just looked down and nodded. And knowing that this was an open threat, Owen showed to them how eager he was, and promised to them that he will definitely deceive the other lizards in any way possible. And Owen clenched his teeth while saying so. If he had known, he wouldn't have worked so hard to come all the way here. Truth be told, they hadn't started out here. They hadn't come from the wilderness either. But they had been looking for a home as they had been attacked by several forces in the south. It was then, Aloy's frogmen took the exhausted lizard men in and warmly welcomed them. Outside of their different skin color, they welcomed them even though they were of another species. But of course it was all trickery. The frogmen invested time to grant them favors, and kindly accepted the grayish-brown lizard men into their tribe. The lizard men began to live a somewhat pleasant life alongside and under the influence of the frogmen. Then came the day the two tribes decided to hold a brotherly ritual, and everything changed. The grayish-brown lizard men went kayaking with the frogmen warriors to enjoy a banquet held in the middle of the island. The lizard men suspected nothing, and had gotten completely drunk on the alcohol Aloy gave them. But the moment they passed out, they were all captured by the frogmen. And the frogmen tribe currently had 1,500 frogmen, and 200 grayish-brown lizard men were enslaved by them. Aside from the difference in numbers, the lizard men children and their caregivers were all held hostage on the island, so the other lizard men never tried to make a stand against the frogmen. And the most problematic thing was that the frogmen had a god, and that god demanded living sacrifices. The god didn't want the sacrifice to be animals, but instead wanted people, more specifically beings that had a conscience and walked on two legs. And so, the tribal chief and warriors of the lizard men were offered. The other grayish-brown lizard men could clearly see what was happening on the island from across the lake. The monster chewed